300 geese crossed a drowned field at dawn. The woman who bought them stood waist-deep in mud, laughing for the first time in 2 winters. Her hair was white. Her knees ached. Her hands trembled the way a nurse's hands tremble after holding too many dying men. Behind her, a county's worth of farmers leaned on the fence. Arms crossed, mouths tight, certain every last one of them that they were watching a 60-year-old widow lose what little she had left. None of them understood. Hannah Wexler had not gone soft in the head. She had not been broken by the flood or the fire or the 3 years of sleeping alone in a house too quiet to bear. She was something else entirely. She was a woman who had remembered. But to understand the geese, we have to go back 8 months, to a quieter morning, to a porch in Vermont, to a woman who did not yet know she was about to become the most talked about widow in Stillwater Bend. The town of Stillwater Bend sat in a valley the color of wet slate. It had a feed store, a church, a Grange Hall older than most of the men who voted in it. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, and where everyone's business sooner or later came up for discussion at the counter at Hubbard's General. Hannah Wexler lived on the eastern edge of it. 45 acres. A 2-story farmhouse with peeling white paint. A barn that leaned just slightly toward the creek. The creek was called Cold Brook. It was most years a polite thing, a ribbon of water, a place where children waded in July, a sound you fell asleep to. But Cold Brook had a temper, and Hannah knew its temper better than most. Her upper 25 acres sat on a gentle rise. Safe, dry, honest. Her lower 20 acres dipped toward the creek like a saucer. And in spring, when the snowmelt came down from the mountains, that saucer filled. She had farmed this land 11 years, ever since she and Errol had bought it from his uncle. She knew the rhythm of it, the way you know the rhythm of a man's breathing in bed beside you. Except Errol was not in bed beside her anymore. Errol had been gone 3 years, 3 winters, 3 springs, 3 porches worth of evenings where the second chair stayed empty. He had been a veterinarian, a country vet, the kind who drove out at 2 in the morning to pull a calf and came home smelling like iodine and hay. He had kind hands, quiet eyes, a way of saying her name Hannah like it was the answer to a question he had been carrying around all day. Lung cancer took him in 14 months. The hospital bills took everything else. What was left of the savings went to the headstone. A simple one. Granite. His name. His dates. And underneath in letters she had chosen herself. He was kind to things that could not speak. She had stood at that stone in the rain, and she had not cried. She had not cried at the funeral either. She had not cried, in fact, in 3 full years. Because crying, Hannah Wexler believed, was a thing you did when someone could hold you afterward. And there was no one. So instead, she worked. She rose before light. She fed her 2 old hens. She walked the fence line. She mended what needed mending. She kept the porch swept, and the wood box full, and the kitchen clean. And in the evenings when the house grew too quiet, she read her old nursing books by the lamp, because reading was the closest thing she had to a conversation. Her hands were 60 years old. Her back was 60 years old. Her grief was 3. The first sign of trouble came in April, a Tuesday. The radio said rain. Hannah stood at her kitchen window and watched the sky bruise. "It'll pass," she said out loud, to no one. It did not pass. It rained Tuesday. It rained Wednesday. It rained Thursday. By Friday, the lower acres were standing in 3 inches of water. By Saturday, 6. By Sunday night, when Hannah went to bed with the rain still drumming on the tin roof of the porch the saucer had filled, she did not sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to her field disappear. Cold Brook had jumped its banks at midnight. She could hear it. A new sound. A wider sound. The sound of water that was no longer going where it was supposed to go. She got up at 3 in the morning. She put on Errol's old wool coat. the one that still smelled faintly of him, of the antiseptic he washed his hands with, of the pipe tobacco he had quit twice and gone back to twice. She walked out into the yard with a kerosene lantern, and she saw the lake. Where her lower 20 acres had been the field she had planted in oats last year, the field she had counted on for this year's hay, there was now a sheet of black water. The kerosene light caught it, bounced off it, made it look like polished slate. Hannah stood on the rise above it for a long time. The rain was easing, just enough that she could hear somewhere out across the water the sound of a tree branch knocking against itself. She did not weep. She did not sink to her knees the way a woman in a story might. She simply stood there, an old widow in a dead man's coat, holding a lantern, looking at a field she could no longer plant. And in the lantern light, very quietly, she said, "Errol, I'm in trouble." The trouble doubled before dawn. She had walked back toward the house, slow, her knees protesting, her boots heavy with mud. She was almost to the porch when she saw the flash, a bright splitting white, up the rise, where the seed shed stood. Then the crack, then the smell. Lightning had struck the seed shed. By the time Hannah ran up the slope, and at 60 with bad knees in mud ran is a generous word, the roof was already going. Orange tongues climbing the rafters, sparks spitting into the wet sky. She had 200 pounds of seed in that shed. Oats, clover, corn, beans, everything for the spring planting on the upper fields. Everything. She tried. God help her, she tried. She filled buckets from the rain barrel. She threw water at a fire 10 feet tall. She burned a strip down the inside of her left forearm doing it. The shed went anyway. It collapsed in on itself sometime around 5 in the morning. By the time the sun came up gray and indifferent, there was nothing left but a black square of ash and the iron hinges of a door that no longer led anywhere. Hannah sat in the wet grass. She looked at her ruined field. She looked at her ruined shed. She looked at her 2 trembling hands. And she said to the empty morning, "Well, just that." Well, because what else does a woman say when the sky has taken everything she had in a single night? By Tuesday, the whole valley knew. That was the thing about small towns. The bad news traveled before the smoke had cooled. Marlene Crisp came up the lane first. She always did. Marlene was 58, wide in the hips, sharp in the tongue. The kind of friend who would tell you your dress was unflattering and then hem it for you anyway. She had been Hannah's closest friend for 20 years. They had nursed each other through 2 husbands. Marlene's first one a drinker by way of divorce. Errol by way of cancer. She came up the lane in her muddy Buick and got out without knocking. She walked straight to the porch. She looked at Hannah. She looked at the ash square where the seed shed had been. She looked at the lake that used to be a field. She said, "Oh, honey." Hannah did not answer. Marlene sat down next to her on the porch step. She did not try to hug her. Marlene Crisp had never been a hugger. She just sat, hip to hip, 2 old bodies on a wet step. "You'll sell to Silas," Marlene said. "Not a question, a fact." "I will not, Hannah. I will not. You can't farm a lake. I know what I have. Do you?" Hannah looked at her. "I have a flooded field. I have no seed. I have 1 mortgage and 2 hens and a husband 3 years dead." "That's what I'm saying." "And I have," Hannah said more slowly, "something else, which I'm still working out." Marlene squinted. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm thinking." "Hannah Wexler, when you start talking like a sphinx, it means you're about to do something foolish." Hannah almost smiled. Almost. "It means," she said, "that I remember something from a long time ago, and I'm not ready to throw it away yet." Marlene let out a long breath through her nose, the way a woman does when she has known another woman long enough to recognize a closed door. "Just promise me," she said. You won't decide anything until you've slept. Hannah nodded. She did not say that she had not slept properly in 3 years. Silas Thorne came on Thursday. He drove a green pickup truck with a chrome bumper and not a speck of mud on it, which told you everything you needed to know about Silas Thorne. The man owned more acreage than anyone in the county. He had not in living memory been seen with dirt on his hands. He was 52, tall, lean, a face like a cabinet door, polite, closed, lacquered. He parked in Hannah's drive. He walked up her steps. He took off his hat because Silas Thorne had been raised to take off his hat, and he stood on her porch like he had every right to. Mrs. Wexler, Mr. Thorne, I was sorry to hear. I'm sure you were. He did not flinch. That was the thing about Silas. He did not flinch. I won't waste your morning, he said. I came with an offer. Of course you did. He reached into his coat. He pulled out a folded paper. Already drawn up. Already signed on his end. He had come ready. He had come. Hannah realized the moment he heard about the shed. She did not take the paper. He laid it on the porch rail between them. It's a fair price, he said. Is it? It's more than fair given the condition of the lower acres. The lower acres, Hannah said, are underwater. Yes, ma'am, that's what I'm saying. He looked at her with those flat, lacquered eyes. Mrs. Wexler, Hannah, you're 60 years old. You're alone out here. You lost Errol 3 years back, and now you've lost your seed in one night. That's a sign. The Lord is telling you something. He's telling you it's time. She did not answer. Take the money, Silas said. Move into town. Rent a nice little place near the church. Let Errol rest. It was the last sentence that did it. Let Errol rest. As if Errol were the one who could not let go. As if Hannah were holding him here stubborn and selfish against his own peace. Something cold and bright rose up in her chest. She picked up the folded paper. She did not unfold it. She did not tear it. She simply handed it back to him. Flat, steady, without expression. Mr. Thorne? Ma'am? My husband is resting just fine. It is me you are worried about. And you are not worried about me. You are worried about my lower 20 acres. He opened his mouth. She kept going. You have offered me 3 times for this land. Each time at a worse moment. Each time at a lower price. I have said no 3 times. I will say no a 4th. And if there is a 5th, Mr. Thorne, I will say it with less politeness than this. A muscle moved in his jaw. He put his hat back on. He nodded once. Tight. Good day, Mrs. Wexler. Good day, Mr. Thorne. He walked back to his clean green truck. He drove away down her lane. And Hannah Wexler sat on her porch for a long time after holding her own trembling hand in her lap, waiting for it to stop. It took 40 minutes. That night she counted the tin box. The tin box lived under the loose floorboard beneath the bed. It had a picture of a Scottish terrier on the lid. It had been Errol's mother's once. It held everything Hannah had in the world that was not land. She counted it twice. Once at the kitchen table, once on the bed. The number did not change. It was enough. Just enough. For one thing. Not enough to replace the seed. Not enough to pay a hired hand for spring. Not enough certainly to drain 20 acres of water back into a creek that did not want it. Enough for one wild thing. One bet. One last move on a board that had almost no pieces left. She put the money back in the tin. She put the tin back under the board. She lay in the dark and listened to the rain. She did not yet know what she would do, but somewhere in the back of her mind, behind 25 years and 1,000 miles, a memory was beginning to surface. A flooded field, birds on water, an old woman's voice saying, "Share." The memory came back fully on Friday. She was cleaning out the ash square where the shed had been. Not because she expected to save anything. Because a body has to do something, and Hannah's body did not know how to sit still while grief arrived. She raked, she shoveled, she sifted black ash through her fingers looking for anything that had survived. And then her shovel hit metal. A box. Errol's old tin box. The one he had kept his accounts in. She had thought it was in the house. She had been wrong. It had been in the shed. She knelt in the wet ash and pried it open. The papers inside were mostly burned at the edges. Brittle. Brown. But the center pages had survived. Folded tight. Sealed in by their own weight. She lifted them out. Receipts, tax forms, a vaccination schedule for a herd of dairy cows long since sold, and at the bottom in a sealed envelope for Hannah. If. That was all it said. On the outside. For Hannah. If. She knew his handwriting. She knew exactly what if meant. He had written this when he was sick. He had hidden it in a tin box in a shed. He had hidden it where she would only find it if she ever had to dig. He had known her. Oh, he had known her. She sat down in the ash. She opened the envelope with hands that had gone cold. The letter was short. Hannah, my love, I know you. I know you will manage. You always do. You will pay the bills and bury me proper and feed the hens and walk the fence line, and you will not cry where anyone can see. But there is one thing I never got around to teaching you, and it is the only thing I am leaving you that matters. You do not have to do it alone. Promise me. The next time life knocks you flat, and it will, because life does, you will let somebody pick you up. You will knock on a door. You will say, I need help. You will let them in. I am asking this of you because I love you, not because you are weak. You have never been weak a day in your life. I am asking because the strongest thing a person can do is stop pretending they don't bleed. All my love. Always. Errol. Hannah read it. She read it again. Then a third time. Slower. And then sitting in a black square of ash with mud on her knees and her dead husband's burned tin box in her lap, Hannah Wexler put her face in her hands. And she wept. She wept the way a 60-year-old woman weeps when she has held it in for 3 years. Not pretty, not quiet. Great heaving sobs that came up out of her belly like something being born. She wept for Errol. She wept for the field. She wept for the seed. She wept for the bills. She wept for every night she had eaten supper standing at the sink. She wept for the way the porch swing did not move on its own. She wept for the second pillow she still had not given away. She wept until she had nothing left. And when she stopped, the sky had gone a kind of pale lavender. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. She looked at the lake that had been her field, and the memory came up clean, whole, like a fish surfacing. Louisiana, the early 1950s. She had been a Red Cross nurse, 35 years old. They had sent her down to the bayou parishes after a season of bad flooding. She had spent 3 years working those parishes, tending to people who had lost everything, people who lived on land that flooded every spring and who against all sense did not leave it. And there had been an old woman, a Cajun woman, Madame Boudreau, 80 if she was a day, hands like cypress roots. Madame Boudreau had taken Hannah out one morning to see her rice patch. Her rice patch was a flooded field. In the flooded field, paddling in slow, contented circles, were ducks and geese, dozens of them, eating the bugs, stirring the water, fertilizing as they went. Madame Boudreau had pointed at them. She had said in her thick old voice, "Share that there is a farmer's hired hand, works for bugs, don't ask for wages, and the rice she grow taller than my granddaughter every year no matter how the river behave." Hannah had filed it away. She had filed it away the way a woman files away a tool she does not yet need. She had been 35. Now she was 60. and the tool had just become the most valuable thing she owned. She walked to the field. She stood at its edge. She looked at 20 acres of standing black water, cattails already pushing up at the margins, a heron somewhere calling. It was not a ruined field. It was a paddy that did not know it yet. She felt something move in her chest, something that had not moved in 3 years. Hope, the dangerous kind, the kind that costs you everything if you are wrong. She went back to the house. She lit the lamp. She got out paper and pencil. She did the arithmetic of a desperate woman. The next morning, she dressed in her good gray dress. Not because anyone would see her, because she would see her. Because a woman about to do a foolish thing should at least do it in good clothes. She drove to the regional livestock auction in 3 Rivers. 20 miles. Errol's old truck coughed twice on the way and then settled into its familiar rumble. The auction yard was full when she arrived. Men, cattle, hogs, horses, the smell of manure and tobacco and coffee, the auctioneer's voice rolling out over it all like a fast river. Hannah moved through the crowd like a woman who knew exactly where she was going, even though she did not. She found the bird pens at the back. Tucked between a row of hog crates and a fence full of bored sheep, there was a great noisy commotion of geese. 100 of them at least. No more. She walked the row. Counted. 300. Mixed breed. Whites and browns and grays. Honking, hissing, stretching their necks. A few buyers had glanced at them. None had stopped. Geese were a nuisance. Geese were what you owned if you were too cheap for a dog. Nobody at a serious livestock auction came for geese. Hannah stood at the rail. She looked at 300 birds nobody wanted. She felt for the second time in a week that dangerous movement in her chest. She raised her hand when the lot came up. The auctioneer almost did not see her. She raised it higher. He saw her. He paused. "Ma'am, you're bidding on the lot. I'm bidding on all of them." A laugh ran through the men around her, light at first, then louder. One man slapped his thigh. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the whole lot, that's 300 head, I can count, sir." More laughter. He named a price. She nodded. He named it again louder in case she had not understood. She said in a voice that carried, "I heard you the first time. Sold." The hammer came down. The yard went briefly, beautifully silent. Then it erupted. Men laughing. Men slapping each other on the back. "Did you see her? Did you see what she just did? 300 geese. The Wexler widow. Lord have mercy." Hannah did not look at them. She walked to the clerk's table to pay. The clerk was a woman. A widow by the look of her. 45 maybe. Hair pulled back tight. Dark eyes. The kind of face that had been doing other people's arithmetic for too long. Her nameplate said, "I. Hadley." She took Hannah's money. She counted it. She wrote the receipt. She did not laugh. She did not even smile. She handed Hannah the slip and said in a quiet voice that did not carry past the table, "My grandmother kept geese, down in Louisiana, Acadiana Parish. She said a goose was a farmhand who worked for bugs and never asked for wages." Hannah's hand stopped halfway to her purse. She looked up. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Hannah said very softly, "Madame Boudreau." The clerk's eyebrows lifted. "You knew her." "I nursed her sister a long time ago. Something passed between them. Older than either of them. A line drawn across many years and 2,000 miles. The clerk Imogene the receipt said in her own neat hand. Imogene Hadley leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Wexler, folks here are going to give you a hard time. For a long while, about what you just did. I know. You're going to need a second pair of hands, sooner than you think. I know that too." Imogene Hadley nodded once. Slow Final. Sunday's I'm free. Hannah did not trust her voice. She just nodded back. She took her receipt. She walked out to her truck. Behind her in the loading yard, men were already arguing about who would help her crate 300 geese onto the back of an old vet's pickup. They helped. Eventually. Because countrymen, however much they laugh, will not let a 60-year-old woman load 300 birds alone. They laughed the whole time they did it. Hannah did not. She tied down the last crate. She climbed into the cab. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Errol's wool coat was on the passenger seat. She reached over. She laid her hand on it. Just for a second. "Errol," she said. I knocked. Then she started the truck and drove home. Word reached Stillwater Bend before she did. She knew it would. 3 Rivers was 20 miles. The phone lines were faster than her truck. By the time she turned up her own lane, half the valley had found a reason to be standing where they could see. Children on bicycles, men on porches. Marlene Crisp's Buick parked half in the ditch. The Hubbards from the general store pretending to admire a fence post. Reverend Ostrander himself walking the man was 73 up the road in his black coat as if he just happened to be passing. They watched her come up the lane. 300 geese in the bed of the truck. Honking. Hissing. A great noisy brown and white commotion rocking the leaf springs. Hannah did not slow down. She did not look at any of them. She drove past Marlene, past the Hubbards, past the Reverend. She drove right up to the edge of the flooded field. She put the truck in park. She got out. She walked around to the tailgate. She opened the first crate. The geese poured out, not slowly, not cautiously. They came out in a great white and brown wave, jostling each other, half falling down the ramp, beating their wings, and the moment their feet hit water, the moment those webbed feet touched the cold black surface of her ruined field, something happened. 300 geese discovered paradise. They hit the water in a thundering, honking, ecstatic rush. They dunked their heads. They snapped at mosquito larvae. They paddled out across the lake of mud with their tails high and their voices loud, and they fanned out across 20 acres in less than 4 minutes. Hannah stood at the fence and watched them. And she laughed. She laughed the way she had not laughed since before Errol got sick. Hand over her mouth. Head tipped back. A sound that came up from somewhere she had thought was sealed off. The crowd at the road watched her laugh. They had come to see a 60-year-old widow make a fool of herself. They had not expected to see her happy. It was in some ways worse than the foolishness. A foolish widow they could pity. A happy widow they could not place at all. The crowd began slowly to disperse. Embarrassed. Uncertain. The way a crowd disperses when the show has not gone the way the show was supposed to go. All except one. At the far end of the road in his clean green pickup parked just at the edge of where Hannah's lane met the county road sat Silas Thorne. He had not gotten out of the truck. He had not honked or waved or called out. He sat behind the wheel with both hands on it. And he watched. He watched the geese hit the water. He watched Hannah laugh. He watched 300 birds spread across a field he had wanted to own for 30 years. And his face did not look angry. His face did not look smug. His face, and Hannah caught it just for a half second when she finally turned and looked back at the road, his face looked afraid. Not annoyed. Not put out. Afraid. A grown man. A landowner. A man who held paper on half the loans in the valley. Afraid. Of an old woman. Of 300 geese. Of a field full of water. Hannah Wexler stood at the fence. The geese honking behind her. Errol's letter folded inside the front of her dress against her heart. The sun coming up over the eastern ridge. She looked across the lane at Silas Thorne. And she thought very clearly with the part of her mind that had once been a triage nurse during a flood. Something is wrong with that man. Something I do not yet understand. But I am going to. Silas Thorne started his truck. He drove away. The first morning after the geese came home, Hannah Wexler woke up before the sun. This was not unusual. She had been waking before the sun for 40 years. What was unusual was the sound. 300 geese, it turns out, do not sleep quietly. They mutter. They shuffle. They argue with each other about nothing at all. The whole flock made a low, gabbling murmur that drifted up the rise from the field through her open bedroom window into the dark of her room. It sounded, Hannah thought, like a town. A small town, holding its breakfast meeting. She lay there a moment, listening, and she realized slowly, the way a body realizes it has been cold, that she was not alone in the house anymore. Not really. She had 300 neighbors now, loud ones, hungry ones. Neighbors who did not know about Errol or the cancer or the bills or the silence. Neighbors who only knew that the field was full of bugs, and that life at the moment was very good. Hannah got out of bed. She did it in stages, the way 60-year-old knees demand. Sit, steady, stand. She walked to the window. In the gray, pre-dawn light, she could just make out the field, the water, the white and brown shapes of birds on it, already moving, already working. She watched for a long minute. Then she said out loud, "All right then," and she went downstairs to start the coffee. The first 3 days, she made every mistake a woman can make. She did not know geese could not be left out at night. She learned. The first night, a fox took 2. She found the feathers at dawn. White feathers in a black puddle. A few drops of blood already going brown. She stood in the wet grass and her hands shook. Because 2 was nothing. 2 was a thimble. But 2 could become 20. And 20 could become 100. And 100 would end her. She drove to Hubbard's General that morning. She bought wire. She bought lumber. She bought nails. She put it on the tab. Mr. Hubbard, who had stood at the end of her lane 2 days before pretending to admire a fence post, did not meet her eyes when he wrote it down. She drove home. She built a shelter. 60 years old, bad knees, burned forearm. She built a goose shelter from scrap wood and chicken wire, and the kind of stubbornness that comes from having buried someone you loved. It took her 4 days. On the second day, Marlene Crisp came up the lane and saw what Hannah was doing. Marlene parked the Buick. She got out. She walked over. She looked at the shelter. She looked at Hannah. She looked at the hammer in Hannah's hand. She said, "You are 60 years old. I am aware. You are going to break your back. I am aware of that too. Hannah." Marlene. Marlene stood there a long moment with her arms crossed. Then, and Hannah would remember this for the rest of her life, Marlene walked over to the pile of lumber. She picked up a board. She set it on the sawhorses. She said, "Where's your other hammer?" "In the barn, second shelf." Marlene Crisp, age 58, in her good Sunday slacks, walked to the barn. She came back with the second hammer. She did not say a word. The 2 old women built the rest of the shelter together. They did not talk much. Around noon, Marlene said, "This is the stupidest thing you have ever done." Around 3, Marlene said, "I am only here because if you die out here, who feeds your hens?" Around 6, when the shelter was finished and the geese were starting to file in for the night in a long, obedient, ridiculous brown and white line, Marlene said, "They march like little soldiers." They do. Hannah. Yes. I still think you've lost your mind. I know, but that line, that is the most peculiar thing I've ever seen. They watched the geese go in. They did not say anything else. When Marlene drove off down the lane that night, Hannah stood at the porch and watched the taillights go. And she thought, that is the second person Errol made me promise. And I did not even have to knock. The eggs came on the 8th day. Hannah went into the shelter that morning and stopped in the doorway. Eggs, pale blue-green, larger than a chicken egg, heavy. 2, then 5. Then by the end of the week, 3 dozen a day. By the second week, 6 dozen. By the third, 8. Hannah Wexler alone in a kitchen at 60 could not eat 8 dozen eggs a day, could not give them away fast enough either. Marlene only had so many cake recipes. Reverend Ostrander, when she brought him a basket, looked at it with the polite alarm of a man who lived alone and ate from cans. She needed a buyer. She knew exactly who to ask. She drove to Three Rivers on a Sunday afternoon. She wore the gray dress again. She brought a basket of 2 dozen goose eggs packed in straw nestled in a cloth that had once been one of Errol's good shirts. She went to the county auction office. It was closed on Sundays, but Imogene Hadley lived in the apartment above it. Hannah knew this because Imogene had told her in a few clipped sentences over the receipt counter 2 weeks ago. Sundays, I'm free. Apartment over the office. Side stairs. Hannah climbed the side stairs. She was halfway up when her knee buckled. She caught the rail. She steadied. She took the rest of the stairs slow. At the top, she knocked. The door opened. Imogene Hadley stood there in a faded blue house dress. Her hair down for once. She looked younger that way. Not young, just less guarded. She looked at Hannah. She looked at the basket. She said, "Come in." That was the beginning. Imogene's kitchen was small, clean. A geranium on the windowsill. A photograph on the wall of a young man in a dark suit. Hair parted on the side. Serious mouth. Hannah did not ask. Imogene set out 2 cups. Made tea. Poured it without asking what Hannah took. She candled the first goose egg against a lamp the way her grandmother had taught her. Showed Hannah how to look for the dark spot, the cloudy spot, the blood ring. She wrote down 2 names on a piece of paper. Murchison's Hotel, Three Rivers Bakery. She said, Mr. Murchison buys eggs by the case. He pays a premium for goose eggs because the cakes come out richer. He also doesn't ask questions about where eggs come from, which we will not need, but it's good to know. Why won't we need? Because I'm going to walk you over there tomorrow morning. Hannah set down her cup. Imogene, I came to ask if you would write me a letter of introduction. I did not come to ask you to leave your work. I get off at 10 on Mondays. It's my short day. Even so. Mrs. Wexler. Hannah. Hannah. My grandmother kept geese in a parish where nobody else kept geese. She made it work because the women around her made it work with her. That is how it is done. That is the only way it is done. Hannah stared at her tea. She did not trust her voice. After a long moment, Imogene said quieter, You knew Madame Boudreau. You nursed her sister. You don't owe me an explanation for showing up at my door. You showed up at her door a long time ago and she fed you red beans. Now you're at mine. Hannah looked up. Imogene's eyes were wet. Just at the corners. Just for a second. I have been waiting, Imogene said. A long time for somebody from that life to walk back into mine. Hannah did not answer. She did not have to. She just nodded. And the 2 women drank their tea. The eggs sold. Murchison's took every case Hannah could bring. He paid in cash. He shook her hand the first time and said, Ma'am, your eggs are the best thing in my kitchen this month, and you can quote me. The bakery took the rest. The baker, a tall, thin man named Pruitt, kissed her on both cheeks the way his mother had taught him in Quebec. By the end of May, Hannah Wexler was driving to Three Rivers twice a week with a wagon full of eggs and coming home with money in her pocket. Not a fortune, but money. Money from a field everyone had pronounced dead. She paid off the feed store tab. She paid down a piece of the back interest on the mortgage. She bought for the first time in 3 years a pound of real coffee instead of the chicory blend. She drank it slow. She drank it at the kitchen table. And she thought, Errol. Coffee. She did not say it out loud, but she set the second cup down across from her anyway. Just for a minute. Just while she finished the first. The valley noticed. Of course they noticed. It was one thing to laugh at a foolish old widow at the auction yard. It was another thing entirely to watch that widow drive to market twice a week with her wagon loaded. At Hubbard's General, Silas Thorne made a point of mentioning it. "A few egg sales," he said, holding court at the back counter, "do not make a farm." The men around him nodded, carefully. "Wait until summer," Silas said. "Wait until those geese start eating her out of house and home. Wait until the novelty wears thin. A flock that big needs grain. Where's she going to get grain money? She lost her seed. She has no upper crop. It's a matter of time." He sipped his coffee. A matter of time. He let the men nod. He did not tell them what he had seen. He did not tell them that on 3 different mornings driving past the Wexler place on his way to town, he had slowed his truck, looked across the fence, seen what no one else was looking for. The water in Hannah's flooded field was clear, not stagnant, not green, not breeding mosquitoes the way every other low spot in the valley was breeding them this wet spring. Clear, because 300 webbed feet were stirring it every hour of every day, and 300 bills were eating every larva that tried to hatch. Silas Thorne knew what he was looking at. He had been told about it once, a very long time ago, by a man he had spent his entire life trying to forget. He sipped his coffee. He kept that knowledge to himself. For now. The rice came in late May. Hannah had written to Cornell. She had written more specifically to a Dr. Eleanor Pemberton, 65 years old, who had been quoted in the Grange paper about cold climate rice experiments. Hannah had written in pencil on a sheet of lined paper. She had been honest in the letter. She had said, "I am a 60-year-old widow with a flooded field, a flock of 300 geese and a hunch. If you have any seed you can spare, I would be grateful." 3 weeks later, a parcel arrived. A burlap sack of rice seed, 2 pages of typed instructions, and a handwritten note on the bottom of the second page. "Mrs. Wexler, I have spent 15 years trying to convince serious farmers to try this. None of them will. You are the first letter I have received in a decade that did not begin with a man telling me why I am wrong. Plant it. Tell me what happens. E. Pemberton." Hannah read the note 3 times. She folded it. She put it in the kitchen drawer with the arrow letter. Then she waded into her flooded field, the geese parting around her in indignant little flotillas, and she began to sow. It was slow, strange work, broadcasting seed across standing water, her hands cold, her dress wet to the thigh, the geese honking at her, scolding her, occasionally nipping at the hem of her dress as if to say, "What are you doing in our living room?" She talked to them. She could not help it. "Excuse me. Move. Yes, you, the brown one. I am putting in your roof." She covered all 20 acres in 3 days. She climbed out of the water on the 3rd evening, and she did not have the strength to make supper. She lay down on the porch in her wet dress, and she slept there for 2 hours before she could move. But 2 weeks later, 2 weeks, there were thin green shoots breaking the surface of her field. Rice. Growing. In Vermont. She stood at the fence and her hand went to her mouth. She just stood there and looked at it. A thing that should not exist. A thing that did. Imogene came every Sunday now. She had stopped pretending it was about the eggs. She brought biscuits. She brought her grandmother's old book on poultry. Once she brought a transistor radio, and they sat on the porch and listened to a Red Sox game neither of them really followed, just for the company of voices. In the long evenings when the geese had gone to bed and the rice was settling green into the standing water, Hannah and Imogene sat on the porch. They did not talk much, but what they did say, they meant. One night, Imogene said, "My husband died 10 years ago. Mining accident, up by the Quebec line. I'm sorry. He was 28. I was 35. Imogene. I have done auction books for 10 years, Hannah. I have counted other people's money. And the whole time, every Sunday, I have eaten dinner alone in that apartment above the office." Hannah did not answer right away. She watched the dusk come down. She said, 3 years for me. I know. Errol. I know that too. How? This is a small county, Hannah. Everybody knows everybody. I knew your husband's name before you ever walked into my office. Did you know him? He pulled a calf for my cousin once. 2 in the morning. He did not charge. He said the cousin could pay him in eggs when the hens started laying. Hannah looked over. Imogene was looking at the field. The geese. The light going gold on the water. I have been thinking, Imogene said, since the day you bid on 300 birds that maybe I had been waiting for a reason to come back to my grandmother's life. And then you walked in, with your gray dress and your shaking hands, and you bid on the whole pen. Hannah's throat closed. She reached over. She put her hand on Imogene Hadley's hand. 2 old hands, different ages, same kind of cold. They did not say anything else that night. The first crack came in June. It was a Wednesday. Hot, still. The kind of summer evening when the cicadas start up early and the air smells like cut grass and creek water. Hannah locked the geese in at dusk, counted them as they filed in. 300 less the 4 she had lost in those first chaotic days to the fox and to one inexplicable death she had never figured out. 296. All in. All accounted for. She latched the door. She walked back to the house. She ate her supper. She went to bed. She woke at 2 in the morning to a sound she would never forget. It was not a sound geese make. It was a sound geese make when something is killing them. She was out of bed before she was awake. She grabbed Errol's old hunting jacket off the peg. She grabbed the lantern. She grabbed God forgive her. She did not know what else to grab. She grabbed the cast iron skillet off the stove. She ran. Bad knees. Wet grass. Dark. 60 years old and running across her own yard with a skillet in one hand and a kerosene lantern in the other. She got to the shelter. The door was open. The door she had latched. The latch had been broken from the outside. Inside, in the swinging yellow light of her lantern, she saw 40 geese. Dead. Not eaten. Killed. Necks broken. Bodies thrown. A fox does not do this. A fox kills what it can carry and runs. A fox does not break 40 necks in one night and leave them. This was something else. This was a man. A man with a hatred so specific that he had broken a latch and killed 40 birds and left them where she would find them. Hannah dropped the skillet. She did not scream. She walked into that shelter, into the warm, dim smell of blood and feathers and panicked birds, and she knelt down in it. She knelt down in feathers and blood and goose water. A 60-year-old widow in her dead husband's hunting coat. 256 geese now. Not 300. Not 296. 256. She put her hands on her thighs and she breathed in. She breathed in the smell. She breathed in the loss. She breathed in the very specific cold understanding that someone in this valley hated her enough to walk onto her land in the middle of the night and break a latch with a crowbar. Silas Thorne. It had to be Silas Thorne. Or a man Silas Thorne had paid. She knelt there until the sky started to turn gray. Then she got up. She walked to the house. She washed her hands. She washed them 3 times. And she sat at her kitchen table in the gray morning and she put her face in her hands and she said, Errol, I cannot do this one alone. She was still sitting there at 7 in the morning when she heard a car come up the lane. Marlene's Buick. Marlene got out. She had a hammer in one hand and a paper sack in the other. She walked up to the porch. She did not say good morning. She did not say, I heard. She did not say anything. She set the sack on the porch rail. She said, move over. That was it. 2 words. Move over. Hannah moved over. Marlene sat down. She opened the paper sack. Inside was a thermos of coffee and 2 muffins from her own oven still warm. You eat one of these, Marlene said. Then we are going to go down there, together, and we are going to clean it up. And then we are going to drive to Hubbard's, and we are going to buy heavier wire, and we are going to build a better door. Hannah stared at her. How did you know? Because Silas Thorne came into Hubbard's last night at closing and bought a coil of baling wire he did not need. And Mr. Hubbard told his wife. And Mrs. Hubbard told me on the party line at 6 this morning. And I got dressed. Hannah looked at her. She did not say anything. She did not have to. She took the muffin. She ate it. They cleaned the shelter. It took 6 hours. Marlene did not flinch. Marlene Crisp, who had not slaughtered so much as a chicken in 20 years, picked up dead geese by their feet and carried them 2 at a time to a wheelbarrow Hannah pushed. They buried the 40 birds at the edge of the upper field, in a long, shallow trench. When they were done, Hannah leaned on her shovel and she said, looking at the trench, "He thinks I'll break. I know he does. He thinks this will be the thing. I know. He's wrong." Marlene looked at her. The sun was high, sweat on both their faces. She said, "He is, but not for the reason he thinks. What reason does he think? He thinks you'll break because you're alone." Hannah looked at her. Marlene shrugged. "He's wrong about that too. He has not been paying attention. The rice grew anyway. The geese kept laying. The eggs kept selling. Hannah hired the woman who had not paid a wage in 3 years, a teenage boy from down the valley Mason Whitley, to sleep in the loft of the barn at night with a rifle and his father's blessing. 16 years old. Polite, quiet, eyes like a hawk's. No more geese died. The water in the field stayed clear. The rice headed out green and heavy across 20 acres of standing water. Dr. Pemberton wrote a second letter asking for photographs. A man from the county extension office, Mr. Pruitt, no relation to the baker, came out one Tuesday in late June and walked the field with the expression of a man seeing something he did not believe. He took notes. He took cuttings. He asked Hannah 100 questions and wrote down every answer in a small black book. Before he left, he said, "Mrs. Wexler, if this rice comes in, if it actually comes in, I am going to write you up for the State Agricultural Bulletin." "All right. You don't seem excited." "I am 60 years old, Mr. Pruitt. I have learned not to be excited until the harvest is on the wagon." He laughed. He shook her hand. He drove away. Hannah stood at the gate and watched the dust settle. And she did not let herself think yet the dangerous thought, "It's working." It was working. Until the second Tuesday in July. When the letter came, she saw the envelope in the mailbox from the porch. Cream-colored. Heavy. The kind of envelope that does not bring good news. She walked down the lane. She opened the mailbox. She read the return address. The Bell Hollow Bank of Stillwater Bend. Her stomach turned over. Her mortgage was held there. A small mortgage, a piece of the past. $2,400 left on it, give or take, that she had been paying down faithfully every quarter for 11 years. She stood in the road, and she opened the envelope right there, because she could not wait the 30 feet back to the porch. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. It informed her regretfully that the bank had reviewed her account. It informed her regretfully that given the loss of her seed in the spring fire and the unconventional nature of her current agricultural operations, the bank's officers had determined that her note represented an unacceptable risk to the institution. It informed her regretfully that the full outstanding balance of the loan was therefore being called. Due in full. 30 days. Hannah read the letter twice. She read it a third time. The road tilted under her. She put a hand on the mailbox to steady herself. 30 days. The rice would not be ready in 30 days. The rice was 8 weeks out, maybe 9. The egg money paid bills, paid feed, paid Mason. It did not. Would never pay off $2,400 in 30 days. She walked back up the lane. She did not feel her legs. She did not feel the gravel. She walked into her kitchen. She sat down. She put the letter on the table. She put her hands on either side of it, and she said out loud to her empty house, "He found another way." She picked up the phone. She dialed Imogene's number. Imogene picked up on the third ring. "It's me," Hannah said. "What's wrong?" "The bank called my note." A pause. "Read it to me." Hannah read it. When she finished, Imogene Hadley said in a voice flatter and colder than Hannah had ever heard her use, "This is Silas Thorne, plain as day. He couldn't drown you with mosquitoes. He couldn't break you with the fox, so he's going to drown you with the bank. I know. I'll be there in an hour." Imogene arrived in 54 minutes. She walked in carrying a ledger book and a thermos and an expression Hannah had not seen on a woman's face in many years. War. Quiet war. "Sit down," Imogene said. "I am sitting. Sit down more." Hannah almost laughed. Imogene set the ledger on the table. She opened it. She turned it around so Hannah could read it. Rows of numbers, dates, egg cases, greens, the bakery, the hotel, the county extension, every penny Hannah had earned since the day she bought the geese. "This is you," Imogene said. "This is me. This is what you've made, in 4 months, from a field nobody believed in." The total at the bottom was larger than she expected. It was not enough. "It's not enough," Hannah said. "It's not enough yet. But it is enough to prove something. Hannah, listen to me." Imogene leaned forward. "You are not a foolish old widow with a muddy field anymore. You are a going concern. Going concerns can borrow against what they will earn. The bank won't lend against geese, so we don't ask the bank. Then who? Pruitt, Eleanor Pemberton at Cornell, the New Methods Fund, the Agricultural Society. There are doors, Hannah. There are doors you haven't knocked on yet because you have never in your life knocked on a door asking." Hannah was quiet. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I drove to Three Rivers this morning, while you were on your way. I called Pruitt's office from the booth outside Murchison's. And he's east, some agricultural conference, out of the office 3 weeks." Imogene closed her eyes. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. My note is due in 30 days. By the time Pruitt gets back, I have 7 days. No money moves that fast at the state level. He told me that himself. Eleanor. Eleanor is at the same conference. They're presenting together. Imogene opened her eyes. The kitchen was very quiet. The clock ticked. Outside, somewhere across the field, a goose called. Imogene said slowly, "Then we have a problem." They worked the numbers until 10 that night. They tried everything. Selling part of the flock, but selling the geese now meant losing the rice. The geese were what kept the bugs off. Without them, 2 weeks and the crop was gone. Tearing out the engine to pay for the wheels. Selling the truck not enough. Borrowing against the upper 25 acres same bank. Same Silas Thorne. Going to Marlene. Marlene farmed her own 40 acres on the thinnest margin in the valley. Hannah would not. Would not. By midnight, they were staring at the same arithmetic, the same 30 days, the same locked door at Cornell. Imogene took off her glasses. She rubbed her eyes. She said, "I'm going to drive home. I'm going to sleep. We'll think again in the morning." Imogene. "What?" "Thank you for coming." Imogene stopped at the door. She did not turn around. She said very quietly, "Don't thank me. Not yet. We haven't won anything." She left. Hannah heard the Buick start, heard the gravel under the tires, heard the engine fade down the lane. She sat alone in her kitchen, the ledger on one side, the bank letter on the other. Errol's letter folded between them. 30 days. She got up. She put on his hunting jacket. She walked outside. She did not mean to go to the creek. Her feet went there anyway. She walked across the upper field. The moon was 3/4 full. The geese were silent in their shelter. The rice was a dark green sheen on standing water. The cicadas were going in the trees. She walked down the slope. She walked through the wet grass at the edge of her ruined and resurrected field. She walked along the bank of Cold Brook, the same creek that had jumped its banks in April, the same creek that had brought her this whole strange summer, the same creek that on the night she became a widow she had stood beside in her nightgown and listened to. She sat down on the bank. The water was low now, polite again, a ribbon of moonlight. She just sat. She thought about Errol. She thought about his hands. She thought about the way he had said her name. Hannah. Like it was the answer to a question. She thought about Madame Boudreau, the old Cajun woman by the rice paddy, the hands like cypress roots, the voice saying share. And Hannah did not expect this, did not summon it. The memory rose up on its own. She thought about Madame Boudreau's sister, the sister she had nursed, a tiny brown woman in a tiny brown bed in a tiny brown room. Cancer. The same kind that would later take Errol, though Hannah had not known that yet. She had not had long. Hannah had gone to her 3 afternoons a week, bathed her, read to her, listened to her. And on the last afternoon, the afternoon she knew she would not see another sunrise, she had reached up, caught Hannah's wrist with a hand thin as paper, pulled Hannah's face down close. She had whispered in a voice like dry leaves, "Cher, listen me. The hardest thing in this whole life, it is not the surviving. No, the surviving you can do. We all can do. The hardest thing is to let somebody else help you survive." Then she had closed her eyes, and she had died. Hannah on the bank of Cold Brook many years later, 60 years old, with a bank letter in her pocket and a husband 3 years gone, put both hands over her face. She sat that way a long time. The moon moved. The cicadas went quiet, then started again. And Hannah Wexler understood for the first time in her entire life she had been doing it wrong. She had been doing it wrong since she was a girl. She had nursed her mother through pneumonia at 14, alone. She had nursed wounded men, alone. She had nursed that Cajun sister, alone. She had nursed her own husband through 14 months of cancer, alone. She had buried him, alone. She had spent 3 years grieving him, alone. And the real lesson of this whole strange summer was not work with the water instead of against it. That was the easy lesson. The hard one was this: let somebody else help you survive. She had let Imogene in. A little. She had let Marlene in. A little. But she had not in her whole life ever truly asked. Not once. Errol's letter. You will knock on a door. You will say, "I need help." You will let them in. He had known. Of course he had known. 60 years married. He had known. Hannah stood up off the bank of Cold Brook. Her knees protested. She steadied herself with a hand on a maple sapling. She walked back across her own land in the dark. She did not go home. She got in the truck. She drove. It was almost 3 in the morning. She drove first to the parsonage, Reverend Ostrander's house. White clapboard. A light still on in the kitchen because Reverend Ostrander in his 70s slept the way old preachers sleep badly and in the wrong places. Hannah knocked. He opened the door in his bathrobe. He saw her. He did not look surprised. He said, "Mrs. Wexler, come in. I need your help." "I know. You know." "Hannah, sit down. I'll put the water on." She sat at the Reverend's kitchen table. She told him everything. The bank letter, the 30 days, Pruitt East, Eleanor East, Silas behind it all. He listened. When she finished, he said, "The Agricultural Society meets Thursday, at the Grange. I will arrange for you to address them. I will sit in the front row. I will speak after you if you want me to." "Reverend?" "Yes." "Why are you helping me?" He looked at her. A long, slow look. Hannah, there are things in this valley that have been wrong for a very long time. Some of them are wrong about you. Some of them are wrong about other people. Thursday may be a chance to set more than one of them straight. She did not know what he meant. She would, but not yet. She drove next to Marlene's. It was 4 in the morning. Marlene came to the door in a flannel housecoat, hair in a net, a baseball bat in her hand because Marlene Crisp slept armed on principle. She lowered the bat when she saw Hannah. She said, "Get inside." Hannah got inside. Marlene put on coffee. Hannah told her everything. Marlene listened without speaking. When Hannah finished, Marlene set down her cup, folded her hands on the table, looked at her oldest friend. And then Marlene Crisp did something Hannah had never seen her do. She started to cry, not loud, quiet, steady, the way a woman cries who has been holding something in. "Marlene." "Hannah." "What?" "Hannah, sit down." "I am sitting." "Sit more." Hannah waited. Marlene wiped her face with the heel of her hand. She said, 3 weeks ago, Silas Thorne came to my house. The kitchen went still. He came on a Sunday afternoon. I had just gotten home from church. He came in his green truck and he sat in my parlor and he drank my coffee. And he told me. He told me my note at the bank was overdue, which it is not, which has never been. But he told me the bank could review it any day. He told me my 40 acres could be reviewed for risk just as easily as yours. Hannah's hand had gone to her mouth. He said, Marlene went on, voice very small, that if I would talk to you, if I would help convince you to sell, to take his offer, to move into town, that my own situation would remain entirely steady. He said it like he was doing me a favor. He said it like a neighbor doing a neighbor a kindness. She looked at Hannah, and I did it. The day I came up the lane after the flood. The day I told you to sell. The day I told you it was foolishness. That was him. That was his words coming out of my mouth. I let him use me, Hannah. I was so scared of losing my own 40 acres, I let that man use me against my best friend. Hannah did not speak. Marlene reached across the table. She took Hannah's hand. She held it. Tight. Both her hands around Hannah's one. I came around in June, Marlene said. When the fox came, when you would not stop, when I saw your face. I came around then, but I never told you what I had done, because I was a coward. Hannah, I was a coward, and I am asking you, forgive me or don't, but know that I have not spoken to that man since the fox, and I will not, ever again, as long as I live. The kitchen ticked. Hannah looked at her oldest friend, 58 years old, in a flannel housecoat, crying in her own kitchen at 4 in the morning. Hannah's first thought, the very first thing that rose in her chest, was anger. Hot, white anger. The kind that wants to leave a room and slam a door. Her second thought, half a breath behind. This is the test. This was Errol's letter. Right here, at a kitchen table, at 4 in the morning. The whole letter compressed into one moment. She looked at Marlene. She did not forgive her. Not yet. Not all the way. But she squeezed her hand. She said, Thursday, Grange Hall. You sit in the front row. Hannah. You sit in the front row, Marlene, and when I am done, you stand up, and you tell them what you just told me. Hannah, they will. You stand up, or this friendship is over. Those are your two choices. Marlene closed her eyes. One tear ran down. She did not wipe it. She said, I'll stand. Hannah nodded. She got up. She drove home in the dawn. Thursday came. The Grange Hall was full. It was always full at harvest meetings, but it was fuller this Thursday because word had moved through the valley the way word does, and every farmer in 3 counties knew the Wexler widow was going to speak about something. They did not know what. They had come to find out. Silas Thorne sat near the front, comfortable, broad, a man in a room he was used to running. He had heard no doubt that Hannah's note was due in 3 weeks. He had heard no doubt that Pruitt was east, that Eleanor was east, that every door he could think of had a lock on it. He looked, in fact, like a well-fed cat at a closed pantry. He did not notice when Hannah came in. She came in late, on purpose. She came in with Imogene Hadley on one side and Reverend Ostrander on the other. Marlene Crisp behind them. Mason Whitley, 16 years old in his Sunday suit, behind Marlene. Hannah carried a basket. The basket was covered with a cloth. The room hushed when she walked up the center aisle. Hushed the way a room hushes when the subject of recent gossip walks in. She did not go to the back where she usually stood. She walked to the front, to the long officer's table. She set the basket on it. She uncovered it. Inside the basket, gold and heavy on the stem, lay a sheaf of rice. Cut that morning. Cut from the warmest corner of her field. Cut 6 weeks before anyone in the valley thought it could possibly be cut. The room, every farmer in it, every wife, every man on every committee went absolutely silent. Because rice, Vermont rice, heads heavy, stalks tall. 6 weeks early. The chairman of the society, a man named Henley Albright, looked at the sheaf. He looked at Hannah. He cleared his throat. He said, "Mrs. Wexler, the floor is yours." Hannah lifted a single stalk of rice. The lamplight caught the heads. She let the room see it. Then she set the stalk down, and she began to speak. "Most of you," she said, "came out to my place in April to watch a foolish old widow drown her last dollars in a flock of geese." A nervous laugh in the room. Quick, embarrassed. "I don't blame you. I would have come too." The laugh warmed. A degree. What I want to tell you tonight is what that field is now, because I think it matters to more people in this valley than just me. She told them. She told them about Louisiana in the early 50s, about Madame Boudreau, about the geese in the paddy. She told them about the flood in April, the fire, the seed. She told them about the auction, about Imogene at the clerk's table, about Marlene with the hammer, about Mason in the loft with his rifle, about the fox that wasn't a fox. She did not name Silas yet. She got to the rice. She got to the eggs. She got to the ledger. She held up Imogene's book. "Every figure in this book is true," she said. "Mrs. Hadley keeps the auction's books and half of yours. She has staked her own name on these numbers. Anyone who knows her knows she does not stake it lightly." Imogene stood up where she sat. She did not speak. She just stood. Then she sat back down. It was enough. Hannah went on. "I have," she said, 28 days to clear a note on my house. The bank has called it. The rice is 6 weeks from full harvest. The county extension agent is in Albany at a conference. Dr. Pemberton from Cornell is at the same conference. I cannot get help from the doors I was told to knock on. They are locked for 3 weeks. My note is due in 28 days. She paused. She looked at the room. She looked at Silas Thorne. For the first time. Direct. Eye to eye. "There is a man in this room," she said, "who wanted my land before I ever bought a single goose. He has offered 3 times in 3 years. He has been refused 3 times. When refusing did not work, he called my note at the bank he holds influence over. When that did not seem fast enough, he came to my friend Marlene Crisp, and he threatened her land too, unless she helped him convince me to sell." The room had gone very still. "His name is Silas Thorne." Silas did not move, but his face, his lacquered, careful face, went a shade paler. "I am not here," Hannah said, "to ask the Agricultural Society for charity. I am here to ask you to bridge me against the harvest you can see in this basket. against the rice you can hold in your own hands, against 4 months of figures in a ledger I have brought with me." She paused. "But before you decide, there is one more thing I have to say." This was the part she had not rehearsed. This was the part she had decided walking up the aisle that she would say. "There was a man in this valley 26 years ago who was a tenant farmer on a piece of ground owned by my husband's family. His name was Eldon Thorne. He was Silas's father." The room rustled. A few of the older men looked up, sharply. "Eldon Thorne," Hannah said, "tried to do in 1952 what I've done in 1978. He had heard from a traveling man from Louisiana about geese and ducks on flooded fields. He tried it. He could not afford a big enough flock. The experiment failed. The flood took his crop. He lost everything. He died bitter 3 years later with everyone in this valley still laughing at him." The room did not move. 26 years ago, Hannah said, "This valley laughed a man into the grave. He had the right idea. We did not listen. We thought we were too sensible. We were not. We were just cruel." She looked at Silas now. He was looking at the floor. His hands were on his thighs. His knuckles were white. "I did not know," Hannah said gentler, "any of this until last week, when the Reverend told me. He had carried it 20 years. He felt it was time." The Reverend nodded once, slowly, from the front row. "I will pay my note," Hannah said. "One way or another. I will save my land if I can. But I did not come here only for that. I came here also to say in front of this whole valley where everyone can hear it." She turned to face Silas Thorne directly. "Mr. Thorne, your father was right, about the geese, about the rice, about the water. He saw what I saw. He saw it 26 years before I did. And this valley, including me, including my husband's people, owes his memory an apology that is 26 years late." The room did not breathe. Silas Thorne did not look up. His shoulders began very slightly to shake. A grown man, in a wool coat, in the front row of the Grange Hall. Shaking, he stood up, slowly, like an old man. He was 52 years old. He stood up like 70. He did not look at Hannah. He walked 3 steps to the front, to the officer's table, to the basket of rice. He put one hand on the edge of the table, just to steady himself. He did not kneel. He did not collapse. He did not make a scene. He bowed his head, and he wept. Quiet, steady, tears running down a face that had not in living memory shown so much as a smile. He said, and his voice was so quiet that only the front 3 rows heard it, and they passed it back, slow mouth to mouth through the rest of the room. He said, "My father was right." Then he said, "I am sorry." Then he said, lifting his head, looking at Hannah for the first time, "I am sorry, Mrs. Wexler. I am sorry I have spent my life on the wrong side of his grave." The Grange Hall did not move. Nobody knew what to do. Then Marlene Crisp stood up. She did not look at her notes. She did not have notes. She said loud and clear the way she always said everything, "My name is Marlene Crisp. I have farmed 40 acres in this valley for 31 years. I have known Hannah Wexler for 20 of them. 3 weeks ago, Silas Thorne came to my house and he threatened my land and he used me against my best friend. I let him, because I was afraid. I should not have let him. I am ashamed. And I will spend whatever years I have left making it up. To Hannah, to my own conscience, to this room. I am standing now to say that I will pledge 1/3 of my hay crop this fall against Mrs. Wexler's note. If the society fund cannot cover it, I will. If the society can, my pledge stands anyway as a debt I owe." She sat down. Reverend Ostrander stood up. "The church fund will contribute $400. Old Doss, who had farmed 80 acres just down the valley for 50 years, and who had been quiet all summer about a great many things, stood up. My father told me about geese and rice, 60 years ago, from a man passing through who'd come up from Louisiana. I called my father a dreamer to his face. God forgive me. He was no dreamer. He was just early. I pledged $200 and a cord of dry firewood for the Wexler farm this winter. Mr. Murchison from the hotel. Mr. Pruitt, the baker. Mason Whitley's father, who had not even known he was going to be there until his son walked in. Hands went up. Pledges came in. Imogene Hadley moved among them with her ledger, taking down names in her neat, fast hand, doing it the way she had done auction books for 10 years, the way her grandmother had once kept accounts for an entire Bayou parish. Within 40 minutes, Hannah Wexler had not a bridge against her harvest. She had the whole note covered, with a third left over for winter feed. Pledged, witnessed, logged. Henley Albright stood up. He looked at the room. He looked at the basket of rice. He looked at Silas Thorne, who had not moved from the front. He looked at Hannah. He said, "Mrs. Wexler, this society stands with you." The room broke into applause. Hannah did not cry. She just stood at the front of the Grange Hall, 60 years old, in her gray dress with a single stalk of rice in her hand, and she let the applause wash over her, like rain, like a creek, like water that had finally, after a long dry season, found her field again. Silas Thorne was still standing by the table. Hannah turned to him. She did not smile. She did not embrace him. She said quietly enough that only he heard, "Mr. Thorne, will you walk my rice harvest with me when it comes in? So your father can be there. Through you." He nodded. He could not speak. She nodded back. That was all. 6 weeks later. The lower field came in golden heavy, the first rice harvest the valley had ever seen. Half the county turned out to watch it cut. 256 geese worked the drawn-down rows behind the harvesters, fat and content, hunting the last of the bugs. Crates of eggs and bundles of greens waited on the wagon for the Three Rivers Road. The note was paid. The mortgage was clear. The house was safe. Hannah stood at the fence. Imogene Hadley stood on her right, her hand on the rail next to Hannah's, easy, comfortable, the way two old hands can rest near each other after a long summer of work. Marlene Crisp stood on her left. They had made it back. Not all the way, but far enough. Marlene had spent 12 weeks proving she meant what she had said in her kitchen at 4 in the morning. She was here. She was holding the basket. They would have years to finish what was started. Behind them, leaning on the fence, Silas Thorne stood with his hat in his hands. He had not cut a single stalk. He would not have presumed. But he was here. He had come at dawn. He had not left. Reverend Ostrander was here. Mason Whitley and his father. The Hubbards, the Pruitts. Henley Albright. Old Doss. Dr. Eleanor Pemberton had driven up from Ithaca the night before. She stood at the far end of the fence with a camera. She had been crying off and on since she arrived. Hannah did not ask why. She knew why. The sun was coming up over the eastern ridge. The geese moved in a long brown and white wave across the cut rows. The light caught the water still standing in the lowest spots and turned it gold. Hannah Wexler stood at the fence. She was 60 years old. She had buried a husband. She had buried in some private way a piece of herself with him for 3 years. She had nearly lost her land. She had lost 40 geese to a man's hatred. She had lost her best friend for one bad summer and gotten her back. She had learned at 60 the thing her husband had spent 40 years trying to teach her. You do not have to do it alone. You only have to knock. She looked down the line of people at the fence. Imogene, Marlene, Silas, the Reverend, the boy, the doctor, the neighbors, her people. People she had not 8 months ago known she had. The sun crested the ridge. The whole field went gold. The geese called. Hannah Wexler began to laugh, not the brittle laugh of a woman holding herself together, not the polite laugh of a widow at a church social, a real laugh, a wide laugh, a laugh that came up from somewhere she had thought 3 Aprils ago was sealed off forever. Marlene laughed beside her. Imogene laughed beside her. Silas, after a moment, smiled the first smile any of them had ever seen on his face, small and unsure as a child's. And in the gold light at the top of the rise, 300 geese moved across a Vermont field that should not have grown rice and did anyway. There are some currents you learn to swim with. There are some wounds you learn to let other people bandage. And there are some enemies, it turns out, who are only frightened children who never heard their father's name spoken with respect. At 60 years old, Hannah Wexler had finally learned all three. It is never too late. That is the whole story. That is the only story.